So polls show most African Americans are religious. 9 in 10 say they're absolutely certain God exists. The rest say they feel ostracized. WGN's Larry Potash has more on a woman who's trying to bridge the philosophical divide between believers and non-believers.
It is a sign from above. This billboard on the South Side features an African-American woman. The message: we are here to challenge you to think for yourself. A secular message to an African-American community where 79% say religion is very important in their lives, compared to 56% among all American adults. We tracked down the woman on the billboard, Kimberly Veal. Studying world religions raised her curiosity and her doubt.
I was raised in a church. However, around the age of 11, 12, I started asking questions and questioning religion.
She kept her silence for years, but family and friends could sense by her questions that she was losing faith. She is now the president of People of Color Beyond Faith.
There are many people out here who are surprised when they find out that there are black atheists.
These billboards help Kimberly's and other organizations reach out to people, especially African Americans, who feel ostracized because of what they don't believe.
It's demoralizing, and you feel even more marginalized, especially if you come from groups that have been traditionally marginalized.
For African Americans, the church is more than just a place to worship on Sunday. During slavery, it was the one day of the week they felt some sense of freedom.
The black church was born underground during slavery. It had primarily two aspects. One was everyday survival, and the second aspect was liberation.
I say roll, Jordan, roll.
The word atheism has a bad sound and a bad taste in the black community in America because of the role, the positive role, that the black church and black Christianity have played.
He says the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. inspired followers to turn their faith into action.
He redefined the Christian church as not just praying on Sunday, but a church who's on Monday through Friday involved in actual struggle for the full humanity of all persons.
And become a force for voting rights, education, and feeding the hungry. That's where African American atheists face a challenge. Billboards like these may help non-believers find others with a common philosophy. But then what?
Jesus is alive.
Kimberly Veal would like to partner with churches and help them meet the more practical needs of the community. She realizes not every pastor will welcome her, but Horace Smith will. He's been the pastor of Apostolic Faith Church for 35 years.
I think that sometimes Christians do go so far to make sure they have not denied their faith, they almost lambast people. Why don't you believe this? You're crazy, or you're stupid, or you're whatever. Nah, that doesn't work. Again, it's browbeating. I think that our job is to reflect Jesus, and people have to make a choice. You can't brainwash and beat people into belief.
Yeah, it's demoralizing, but for the most part, it kind of makes us stronger because we'll come back to them in a year or two later and ask, okay, are you ready to talk to us yet?
And that was Kimberly Veal, who you met in the piece. She's joining us today, and we've asked Dr. Neely to stick around as well with Moody Bible Institute. But first of all, let me ask you this. You were a minister.
Yes, ma'am.
You grew up the daughter of a minister. What made you decide there was no God?
Well, I wouldn't say I necessarily decided there was no God. We cannot prove whether there is or isn't a God. What happened was I started asking questions about different things in the Bible, not necessarily understanding. And I took a world religion class, and so I started meeting people of different religions. I would ask them all the same question, and everyone believes that their religion is right. And after going to different churches, I've visited a number of different churches, and it just didn't make any logical sense to me. Now, as far as the church and its importance in our particular culture, I understand that perfectly because that was the only place where we could go without arousing suspicion. And in particular, black women were able to go to church, and basically that was the place that a quote-unquote respectable woman could go.
And it was
without
accepted
the
in the most of the African community.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. So, when you look at that and you look at, you were talking earlier about us being social beings, about it being tribunal, that is correct. That is one thing that I will say that I do do miss about the church, that I do miss the fellowship. I do miss knowing that every Sunday I'll be able to go and see some friends or extended family, maybe sit down, have some dinner together, and share what transpired over the week.
Do you believe that there's a higher being?
I'm not sure. And if there is, he's taking absolutely no interest. He or she, he, she, you know, does not take any interest in what's happening. And so, I mean,
sounds a lot like Bill Maher. And you're familiar with Bill Maher?
I'm familiar with him, but he's a little bit more militant than I would care to categorize myself.
But, you know, his thing is, if there were a God or a higher being, why does he let all these disasters happen or tragedy? There's poverty, et cetera, et cetera. Why would that happen? But you don't feel that way.
Well, I feel that a lot of the tragedies that we're seeing in the world as far as hunger and poverty, a lot of those are man-made. So once you become a little bit more educated and understand what's happening around you, you start to understand that poverty, number one, is man-made. Number two, is expensive to be poor. People make money off of that. So you have to look a little bit deeper.
Is it tough for you being an atheist?
No, not particularly. I'm honest about who I am, but however, I still treat people with common human decency, dignity, and respect. And I've gotten pretty good, you know, responses from that because people are human. So we all have, you know, fallibilities. And so it's about finding what we have in common. And we have more in common than differences. And we need to focus on that.
I have to take issue in the story that we saw before saying that all African Americans go to church and all African Americans would be there, because that's not true.
Exactly.
African Americans are not monolithic. We're all different. So I want to get that out there too to folks so they know that not everybody's religious who's African American. We have atheists, we have agnostics, we have everything. And what's the difference between the agnostic and the atheist to you?
Well, the difference between the agnostic and the atheist is that the agnostics, they will say that they're not sure. However, you will have quite a few atheists that will claim that they are sure and that they know. So they're basically the polar opposite of believers, whereas there are quite a few of us that are kind of in the middle. We're not sure, but you know, we're moving on.
And we should say that, you know, African Americans, we have Jewish, we have Buddhist, we have a little bit of everything. So that I take issue in the piece that we saw before. But Dr. Neely, what is your response to some of the things you're hearing Ms. Veal say?
Well, I'm glad you missed the fellowship. I'm glad about that. I'm glad that there's something in the life of the church that you miss and that you value.
Yes.
I am concerned, yes, I'm concerned. Atheism doesn't seem logical to me, to be honest with you.
So, but isn't it okay for her to feel the way she feels and the way you feel? Isn't it okay for everybody to feel their own way?
Sure, it's just okay. I think, see, as a Christian, my understanding is that God has given us the capacity to choose, the capacity to feel. So the fact that she feels differently about a certain issue, in my thinking, is evidence of the way that God has wired us. So I respect her capacity and her feelings to choose, because in my thinking, even God himself respects her capacity to choose.
I have 2 seconds.
Yes,
Do you want to respond to that? Because we've got to go, but we could sit here all day and talk about this. But what's your response to his real quickly?
Well, my response to that is, you know, we have these different ideologies, but at the end of the day, we have to go beyond that to help these communities that are in need, people that are educationally and economically disadvantaged. I think that we should join together and start working toward the community, because isn't that what Jesus was about? Wasn't he about love and helping others?
Well, now, but see, my argument, I agree with you, but my argument, if God does not exist, I have no basis for concern about the other. Because ultimately, it's if I have no absolute, if I don't have a standard, then I have no basis for concern of the other. I just have a social construct, and that will change from generation to generation, from government to government, so forth and so on. But I agree that we need to care about people, but my issue is, why would I want to care if God doesn't exist? Why would I want to do that?
Because the state of the human condition, the state of human consciousness, it's knowing that there are other people out there. See, that's one of the issues. We have had some issues in the secular community regarding social justice, talking about racial parity, economic justice, so on and so forth.
Sure.
Me, as a person of color, born and raised in the community of color, I know what I have come through. I've seen my neighbors, I've seen family members, and it's, you know, it would be to my benefit to make sure that Jane and Joe have food and encourage them to continue with their education and create businesses in the community so that, you know, with a lot of these churches, many of the members don't even live in the very community where the church is set.
I'm going to have to let that be the last word. We could stay here all day. We're going to come back and talk about the Barack Obama Presidential Library, but thank you both for being here.
Thank you
Very
for having
spirited
us.
discussion.
Honored to be here.
It's coming to Chicago. What does it mean for the city when we return?